think maybe my favorite thing above all of Arcane is that I am very confident in saying that there's many people who work on Arcane right now that feel like they're working on the most important thing of their lives, like their careers. I feel like people feel like they're challenged, they're working on something that's gonna matter, they're gonna look back to and say, yes, like that's a proud moment of my life and I'm happy I worked on it. And that to me is probably the most important thing.
It was a pleasant surprise when, after nearly a decade in development, an adaptation of the League of Legends universe of all video games turned out to be genuinely good. However, the combination of a young adult story, an animated medium, and a video game adaptation, specifically for fans of a hugely popular multiplayer game, attracted viewers with inexperienced media tastes that have led them to enthusiastically praise Arcane as a masterpiece. I am glad people enjoyed it so much, but given this, it's no surprise that despite the rather severe drop in quality in Season 2, many fans still insist it is great, even those aware enough to admit it is worse than Season 1. Unfortunately, and to be clear, Season 2 isn't just worse or a disappointment compared to what we might now describe as the lightning in a bottle quality of Season 1. No, Season 2 is painfully mediocre at best, and broken, contradictory, and nonsensical at worst.
You feel it? That buzzing? Behind your eye? Because you know it could all... Boom!
The potential for continued greatness was there, but the glaring major mistakes that poke countless unsightly ripples throughout Season 2 are impossible to overlook, and I almost feel a sense of vindication in my initial skepticism that a League of Legends TV show deserved to be on such a high pedestal. Somewhat tragically, Season 2 more accurately aligns with my original expectations, tearing open all of the cracks that were easy to excuse in Season 1 and making plenty of new ones.
It's so hard to wipe the slate clean on something.
I think I just need to step back. I need to try and figure this episode out without thinking about all the things that we've talked about.
I know. But we also don't want the baby to go out, Alex. We don't want to murder this baby with our bathwater.
Is that suggesting that we are filling it with more bathwater right now?
A lot of bathwater.
We're not dumping out the bathwater, we're adding bathwater. The baby is steadily drowning.
The first and lowest underlying utility of Arcane's success is that it can stand independent of the League brand and universe, accessible to anyone without prior knowledge of the game's world or characters. Watching the show has better familiarized me with the names and general concepts of what I assume to be various playable heroes in the game, but if anything, I feel my ignorance has enhanced my immersion in the story, unable to anticipate or acknowledge potentially distracting fan service or Easter eggs, such as a character's potential heroic or villainous transformation, or the origins of their equipment and abilities. Even when incorporating such details, Arcane isn't as constrained by fans' expectations of pre-established narrative events, characters, or world building as a story-driven single-player game like The Last of Us. Though, to my understanding, there has been some mild controversy regarding the show's reimagining of certain canonical elements, likely influenced by Riot's desire to siphon viewers towards spending time and money on their infamously addictive games. Alternatively, I can see this as a testament to both the fans and the developers' enthusiasm for Arcane's retcons, inspired to overlook the game's original outlines in favour of the show's more vivid portrayals of characters' backstories, personalities, and aesthetics.
Christian's biggest fear is letting players down. He crushes himself over it. It's actually painful for those closest to him to sort of watch, and it gives you so much respect and appreciation and ultimately trust in what he decides to take responsibility and ownership for.
At its core, and to its eventual detriment in Season 2, Arcane uses fairly typical narrative tropes, world-building ideas, and character templates for its steampunk/magipunk fantasy story, and engaging with mature themes in animation marketed towards teenagers and young adults isn't anything the industry is unfamiliar with. That's fine, nobody should have expected the reinvention of any kind of wheels from the most expensive animated series of all time, released on Netflix and based off the most popular esports game of all time that is derivative of one of the most popular RTS games of all time, which was itself inspired by Warhammer. But what sets Arcane apart amongst its contemporaries is simply the near-perfect proficiency with which it cooks up its ingredients of choice into such a filling, flavourful meal. In just 9 episodes, setting a new gold standard for how to use these tropes to craft compelling characters, bolstered by some of the best voice acting I've ever heard, a memorable soundtrack, and most importantly, some of the finest animation ever seen in television, comparable even to the best films. Altogether, this has instilled Arcane as the brightest beacon of hope for more actually good video game adaptations and Western animation, and I don't think Season 2's shortcomings will have ruined that legacy.
We all want to take animation to this place of mature drama, subtlety and nuance, style and innovation, but it doesn't exist, and I think we together can do it.
Backed by the massive brand and revenue of League, Arcane was granted an unprecedented budget for an animated series, reportedly tens of millions per episode, rarely seen even in live-action series until recently, and those live-action series still always look worse compared to their film counterparts. That the results Arcane was able to squeeze from such a budget still seems so impressive really speaks to the sheer quality of its animation, and, like the writing, it's not that their techniques and toolsets are revolutionary, but that they employ them so effectively that is impressive. It's about time more companies and audiences caught on that maybe the wider suspension of disbelief threshold makes animation the more ideal medium for these spectacular sci-fi and fantasy stories. The supplementary effects attempting to replicate live action do sometimes overstep with things like excessive camera shake, digital zooms, focus shifting and lens debris, but there's still a degree of precision here that live action can't replicate. For instance, the freedom to exaggerate nuanced facial expressions and other character movement that would either come across as absurd in live action or require so many takes to get right that you'd run out of budget or time before being finished. With the already highly expressive voice performances at their disposal, the animators sitting at their desks can meticulously attend to refining every macro and micro expression to align with each character's personality, ensuring they convey enough emotions to eliminate unwanted ambiguity.
I really believe that what we're doing with music in Arcane Season 1 has never been done in entertainment. Period.
During the occasional sequence of hyper-stylized visuals, the music takes center stage control of this ambiguity, and overall, the creative space of animation allows Arcane Season 1 to integrate a diverse range of genres from various artists on top of an equally good orchestral soundtrack to enhance the emotional impact of its most important story beats, unlike how Season 2 would go on to use at least twice as many original pop songs as a crutch for narrative issues I won't get into just yet.
We've worked on all kinds of genres at this point, and when Arcane came about, we said, hey, we're going to craft a full album of all these different songs, of all these different genres. It really was the culmination of all the different skill sets that we've developed over the many years on the music team to craft something that's really unparalleled. We knew that we also wanted to create these special moments in every episode with music. And so with the editors and the directors of our team, we tried to find a moment where the music can actually take over and be in the spotlight.
Whilst the lyrics of most of these songs are guilty of spoon-feeding their respective narrative substance, it's worth the trade-off of having an album of well-produced bangers pre-tailored to suit the emotions of specific plot beats.
We call these the banger labs, where all the bangers are made.
Perfect for indirectly re-experiencing this series, or in Season 2's case, imagining how good it could have been. The difference in use and style between these pop songs and the orchestral soundtrack also benefits the separation between the lower city of Zorn and the upper city of Piltover, a contrast between the multicultural punk of industrialized poverty and the elitist sophistication of abundance, mirroring each city's architectural design. This complex societal dynamic of a deep-rooted class struggle, the central pillar of the show's world-building, and far more essential to the story than you would assume from how Season 2 goes on to sideline it. Arcane's first 3 episodes, making up Act 1, is a sort of prologue to set up the main contenders of this class struggle, centered around 2 sisters orphaned by a violent revolution, which they continue to suffer from the fallout of because they still live in Zorn, and their adoptive father was one of the revolution's leaders. This older generation, who feel it was a mistake going to war, Zorn, represented by Vander, and Piltover, represented by Sheriff Grayson, try to be diplomatic and rein in the idealistic younger generation who think they can fix what those before them failed to, but in episode 3 their efforts are thwarted and their diplomacy diverted when an ambitious crime boss called Silco successfully eliminates them and claims primary influence over Zorn, feeling as though Vander's change of heart to pursue pacifism wasn't going to get them anywhere, and otherwise hating Vander for previously trying to drown him.
Old friend.
Because of the opening title sequence, unfortunately repeatedly using the worst song in the whole show, including Season 2, it is obvious these 3 episodes are a prologue of Vi and Powder being kids before starting their rivalry. It is therefore difficult to invest in Vander's 2 other adoptive kids, Milo and Clagger, who by anime logic are already expendable on the basis of having normal coloured hair and just being more generic.
Dad?
In fact, it's difficult to invest in anyone who doesn't appear in that intro sequence, given they are likely to by some means move into the narrative periphery before or during the suggested time skip. Not that this means Milo, Clagger, Vander, or anyone else who dies by the end of episode 3 aren't still influential on how those left alive push the story forward. The climax of episode 3, Powder's explosive use of a stolen hex crystal, desperate to help her family save Vander, marks the moment Arcane fully comes into its own. The devastating chain reaction kills her adoptive family, shatters her bond with Vi, and delivers her straight into Silco's hands.
It's okay. I'll show them.
It's the true, okay, now I'm paying attention moment, a turning point of emotional and narrative weight that the series builds upon effectively, but never quite surpasses afterwards in sheer dramatic impact, perhaps just because these first 3 episodes so cleanly cook up a smaller box of ingredients than those that follow. On his podcast, prolific fantasy author Brandon Sanderson said the series clicked for him when he realised the story's exaggerations worked because it was grimdark, at least according to his definition of grimdark being a story where characters will inevitably be punished for making what they believe to be morally good decisions, but nobody is wholly good or bad, and their morality is constantly tested through difficult choices they have to make.
I made kind of a revelation as I was watching the last 3 episodes that Arcane is grimdark. And I can accept Jinx as an exaggerated character in the same way I can accept the exaggeration of this world. And it all kind of clicked together to the point that at the end, I'm like, this was a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can critique anything I would change.
Arcane no better encapsulates this than at the end of episode 3, the motivations and personal conflicts within several independently compelling characters brought to a shocking crescendo of tragic death.
Every time she comes, something goes wrong. She jinxes every job.
Powder's deeply paranoid insecurity about how others perceive her to be a detriment is reinforced throughout these 3 episodes and of course continues to haunt her even worse post-time skip after she destructively embraces the nickname Jinx, almost literally haunted by hallucinations of the 2 brothers she killed. Vi reassures Powder that everyone in their group has their failures, and she shouldn't feel so depressed about messing up their heist, but as young and currently unskilled as Powder is, Vi makes her stay behind on the Vander rescue mission, sending this clearly already emotionally unstable girl into one of the best crying fits I've ever seen in media. So when Powder has an epiphany about how she can use her unique skills to help, we understand why she's so determined to do so, and boy do we feel sorry when her plan goes from preventing her family escaping Silco to blowing up the building and almost killing everyone, to Vi angrily confirming her worst insecurity.
Why did you leave me?
Because you're a jinx! Do you you hear me?
And then, after getting kidnapped and imprisoned, seeming to outright abandon her for 7 years. No returning a few moments later after calming down or the next morning to apologize. An enthralling intersection between the world these kids have had no choice to grow up in and the dangerously untested technology that happened to fall into one of their hands. Its destruction here contrasting the glorious success of the Piltover scientists innovating it, Jayce and Viktor.
For the era of Hextech.
It's a beautifully sturdy foundation for understanding the origin of Jinx and why she continues in her antagonistic role, far more than the basic Harley Quinn clone she could have easily fallen into.
You ever need to curse a sibling or a family or a society? My card.
We didn't want the typical like crazy girl laughing around like the Joker and just making no sense. We really wanted to make her feel like deranged and emotionally affected by what she went through.
All the main characters were really scary to cast because, I mean, you were not just making a new character. It was like, oh yeah, there's like, whatever, 6 years of, 100 gazillion million people who have very specific expectations and opinions about who these characters are. So don't f it up.
While Season 1's sturdy foundation and polished exterior remain intact, unlike the crumbling mess of Season 2, it's not without its small cracks and imperfections. Flaws that, in hindsight of Season 2, now feel like warning signs of what was to come. Here are some nitpicks I noticed on my rewatch, some larger and harder to paint over or justify as artistic choices than others. The first use of the opening title sequence in the first episode doesn't particularly suitably transition from the emotions of the scene preceding it, and uses the worst song in the series, performed by a band who go on to be given cameos as an in-universe band performing that same song. Which is immersion-breaking in the same way as Ed Sheeran appearing in Season 7 of Game of Thrones was, except worse relative to the quality of the story it's a part of. Using Vander's old gauntlet on a narrow walkway, Vi just about manages to fend off Silco's goons, whilst Milo and Clagger work to free Vander. A bit of a stretch that a teenage girl beats several adults with weapons, but as soon as they manage to gang up on her, she does struggle. What's less excusable is that the drugged up bully who earlier obliterated Vander's enforcer escort doesn't do the same to Vi here, instead throwing her far enough to escape behind the safety of the solid door of the room with a breakable wall to the outside. Silco for some reason decided to keep Vander hostage in. Vander was bait to capture the kids, but I don't get why he had to be in that room, separated from all of Silco's gang.
There's guards everywhere.
It was easy. We found an open window and...
Oh god.
In arresting Vi and preventing her from running back to Powder, Marcus commits one of the most known cliches of knocking her almost instantly unconscious with a chloroform-soaked rag. Not that head trauma seems to exist in this world, but a concussion from hitting her on the back of the head with his gun might not have been much better, and be too instant for him to tell her and us that he's doing this partially to save Vi from running in and getting killed by Silco.
I'll kill you if he hears you. Come on.
It's the most plot-convenient part of an otherwise great scene, in order to facilitate Powder falling into Silco's hands and hating Vi for leaving her, and Marcus being a bit more interesting than just that enforcer guy who inherits Sheriff Grayson's problems. When Jayce and Viktor are showing Heimerdinger their Hextech progress, one of their tools shoots a laser that almost kills Heimer's pet and could have just as easily been aimed at and killed Heimer.
Anyway,
by the time Jayce shows up at one of Silco's factories with Vi to take out a dozen or so Shimmer soldiers with a big hammer, it's clear he's a bit of a Mary Sue. He's the most egregious example, at least in Season 1, of the character syndrome characters usually fall in proportional to their importance. One of the biggest side effects of this character syndrome is of course plot armor, which Arcane is guilty of in two situations involving Caitlyn. In the first situation, she isn't killed by Jinx's explosion like the enforcers she was investigating with, and actually gets away uninjured enough to be obsessively investigating further in her bedroom the next day. She's helping put out the fire, she sees Jinx's logo on a wall underneath the fire, the wall explodes from the other side and blasts her and the others backwards, and she rolls across the floor basically unscathed, conscious for long enough to see Jinx walking away from the scene. Maybe she didn't get obliterated along with the enforcers who went inside the structure underneath a bunch of dangling bombs, but from standing right in front of a wall that explodes, she gets away with a scratch on her forehead, a tiny bandage on one bicep, and an even tinier bandage below one knee.
I've had a break in the case.
Shouldn't you be resting?
While the trail is hot. Listen.
In the second situation, she and Ekko survive another explosion that kills everyone around them, including Marcus and his entourage of fully armoured enforcers, this time coming from hundreds of mechanical fireflies that were surrounding them on the bridge. For Marcus to die, as more of a character than the faceless enforcers, one of the fireflies has to explode in his face, and though the whole series avoids gore, you can briefly see in the dark his left arm has been blown off, but Caitlyn suffers only from a few shards of firefly lodged in her thigh. Ekko is lying on the ground here somewhere after Marcus conveniently shot him in his chest armor, and he's unaffected enough by the fireflies to save Vi and Caitlyn by flying in and engaging Jinx on his hoverboard thing. At the end of their fight, they both survive a grenade Jinx activates next to her head. Given the earlier offense, you can't be blamed thinking this is also plot armor, but I think the time they're given to jump away from the grenade is more survivable than each of Caitlyn's scenarios, where she's basically fine after everyone dies around her, and from that grenade, Jinx is injured severely enough, again without gore, to undergo an experimental Darth Vader surgery. Ekko, though, sprained ankle.
Are you alright, lad? Yeah, I'm fine. I just sprained my ankle.
Anyway, that's enough nitpicks, for now. Season 1's biggest crack isn't even really a problem with Season 1, it's something Season 2 takes too far, and that is its almost invariably fast pacing. Although Season 1 could have benefited and been even better from the additional depth provided by slowing down a bit here and there, its fast pacing isn't anywhere near as detrimental to the overall narrative in the same way the severely overstuffed plot of Season 2 is. If I had to summarise Season 1's narrative style, it's that it uses its characters as efficiently as possible, giving them each only as much screen time as necessary to play the parts that move the overall plot in a satisfying direction forward, rarely giving them downtime or atmospherically lingering on scenes as you would usually see in books and many live-action TV shows. This vague, abstract concept of pacing is among the most difficult elements to correctly balance in storytelling, and so different from story to story and from medium to medium. Some feel like they should just get to the point already, others are stylistically impressive enough to get away with thinly stretching their substance, and whilst Arcane Season 1 narrowly avoids the season as a whole feeling rushed or slow, the speedrunning of certain events and relationships are unrealistically tuned to meeting plot deadlines. In particular, I'm thinking of how quickly Heimerdinger is voted off the council, Vi and Caitlyn so quickly becoming all flirty and romantic to get in between Vi and Jinx, Vi at the council meeting arguing against Zorn in order to team up with Jayce to fight Silco, and then Jayce going from using Hextech weapons to attack Zorn to refusing to use Hextech after accidentally killing a kid.
We're done here.
Frankly, the Vi-Caitlyn romance and Vi and Jayce teaming up to have a music video action scene feel like they were developed primarily for fan service. Clearly Season 1 wasn't unfamiliar with issues that would creep further into Season 2. Before ending in Episode 9, the pacing does falter the more it abruptly cuts, sometimes clumsily transitioning between succinct scenes of each character nudging their feet a little closer towards the collective finish line. But if we are to believe the general plot structure of Season 2 was almost completely outlined by the time Season 1 was released, as suggested by footage of the writers struggling with Act 3, then Season 1 ends right before the story's pacing completely falls apart.
Bravo, sis.
Season 1 sometimes pushes the characters along more quickly than I can believe they should develop, but Season 2 is almost like we are seeing only the cutscenes at the beginnings, middles, and ends of video game levels. Without the gameplay, we're missing a lot of the narrative journey to get from point to point, and a lot of the time we are missing the literal physical journey. It's a rapid-fire structure of big events coming and going, as though the characters themselves barely care or understand what God himself is contriving they be put through. The poor pacing of covering what could and should have been at least 2 seasons worth of story in one season that already picks up exactly where the first left off has to be partly responsible for the total collapse into contrivance of how every character is written. It isn't just that Season 2 is poorly paced as a result of overstuffing, but that it wastes the potential set up by Season 1 and lessens its quality in retrospect. You can sort of watch Season 1 as an independent story from the thematic perspective of how wealth inequality promotes generational trauma and eventually revolution, but the fact of the matter is, they've made us care about these characters. Season 1 not only doesn't end their stories, but ends on a cliffhanger of whether several major characters will die, and then Season 2 goes on to write what is now half of their 18-episode existences poorly enough for none of them to have satisfying conclusions. Dragged by their ankles through an artificial, jumbled, suffocating mash of predictable revelations and convergences, each one larger in scale and smaller in emotional resonance than the last, like a massive chocolate cake with sprinkles baked without any eggs, but somehow still revered as delicious by the majority of those stuffing their faces with it. Whilst in Season 1, the characters are only given as much time as necessary, the reasoning behind their actions and how they influence the plot is almost always sensical in hindsight. In Season 2, it's less that their actions influence the plot, and more that they are being bent and twisted into all sorts of contradictions in order to serve the plot. Of course, many writers will have their plot beats figured out first, and arrange a cast of characters as needed. The trick and the illusion of good storytelling is obscuring that reality enough to invest the audience in these made-up people as though the plot isn't predetermined.
Basically, we had the pilot, wrapped up more or less, and now was the time to start working on the rest of the first season.
We had an entire arc for the first season, filled with moments, lots of art, lots of exploration, different locations, different characters, and we were already feeling the pressure of the sort of pipeline rolling.
So yeah, at some point, there was a meeting on my calendar, and I went to Brandon's office, and there was like a bunch of people in there.
He basically, he called me and told me like, hey, I just talked to Brandon and like everyone.
It was basically like an intervention meeting.
I think with everything creatively, you're always kind of waiting for that hammer to fall. We wanted to make sure the story that players got lived up to their expectations. If we couldn't do that, then we shouldn't do that.
The consensus was, you don't have the story yet, and it's not gonna work,
Vi didn't have the strongest arc in Season 1. Her desire to reunite with Jinx, complicated by her new feelings for Caitlyn, propped up by being charismatic and lovable. In fact, I'd say Vi, with the amount of screen time she has, was in the greatest need of improved nuance going into Season 2, and failing to deliver on that is among the most transparent representations of its narrative shortcomings.
Who the hell are you?
Vi's parents were killed by enforcers, and she grew up hating their oppression of Zorn enough to rely on Vander's wisdom calming her down. And yet, after 7 years in Stillwater Prison, experiencing solitary confinement and physical abuse, the trauma she should have is disregarded enough for her to immediately team up with and develop a crush on the enforcer who hired her for an investigation into Zorn. In those 7 years, she supposedly just got really buff and tatted up whilst obsessing over how to reunite with Jinx, whose psychological troubles are central to her character. pigeonholed into a Caitlyn romance as she may be, it's what saves Vi from being one-dimensional past Act 1 of Season 1. Along with how much the Zorn Piltover conflict is sidelined in Season 2, they barely acknowledge Vi's what should be strongly ingrained resentments for the Enforcers, specifically when she's presented with the enormous development of becoming an Enforcer herself. Being taken aback by Caitlyn's initial offer and then having a conflicted facial expression as she joins an Avengers lineup isn't enough. The only justifications for how easily she goes along with this not being out of character are 1, that her character is now just that she obsessively loves Caitlyn as much as she once obsessively wanted to reunite with Jinx, and 2, that she's idiotically ignorant of the damage caused by their methods to infiltrate Zorn, which are to wage chemical warfare on its citizens by controlling the flow of a smoky gas called the Grey. Zorn is poorly ventilated, such that when Enforcers who aren't used to the air make a trip down, they have to wear gas masks, and now they're somehow under the impression they can control a deadly gas enough to smoke out all of the crime lords in their search for Jinx without harming any or all of the innocent people along the way.
The people of the underground deserve to breathe.
There is a visually effective scene where, from Jinx's perspective, the show acknowledges how monstrous their small squad would come across invading through thick walls of smoke, but 90% of the operation occurs during the most egregious of Season 2's many musical montages, tone-deaf in its music choice, and so fast you'll barely absorb how the operation works, let alone how Vi herself feels about the war crimes she's partaking in. Season 2's musical montages are as though every episode and every major character have at least one part of their plot speed-ran by a hyper-stylized sequence like that which introduces the Fireflies in Season 1.
I declare war on anybody standing in the way of what I dream for.
Their frankly amusing frequency takes away from the significance of where such musical sequences should be effective, or at least much more poignant than they are able to be in spite of how little narrative weight they have behind them, ultimately failing to enhance the story in the same organically harmonious way Season 1's soundtrack was able to. Their auditory and visual experimentation feel like stylistically overindulgent spectacles the animation studio, Fortiche, had to pick up the narrative scraps with. No matter how good the songs and sequences themselves might be, they just don't hit the same level without the context to back them up. This need to superficially amplify Arcane's visual spectacle also bleeds into the regular animation, most notably during the Episode 3 action sequence between Vi, Jinx, Caitlyn and Sevika. This fight, which occurs when their vengeful search for Jinx takes them to the lowest depths of Zorn, lacks the clean, grounded choreography that made the brawls between Vi and Sevika in Season 1 so impactful. Instead of building a satisfying rhythm with cohesive choreography, the sequence is constantly disrupted by slow motion and abrupt cutaways to the predictably multiversal surrealism of Jayce, Ekko and Heimerdinger messing with some Hextech nonsense, inadvertently preventing Vi and Jinx from killing each other, an outcome the show fails to convince me the characters are actually willing to go through with. It's silly they do seem to be trying to kill each other, sillier they are only stopped by magical anomalies happening independently elsewhere, and silliest that the action ends with the contrivance of a kid getting in the way of Vi beating Jinx to a pulp, or Caitlyn shooting with her famed accuracy.
She's a child! Move! She's not getting away again!
Kate, you didn't have a choice. He knew what he was signing up for.
One dead kid? There's hundreds more where he came from, thanks to Silco and thanks to people like you who stuck their heads in the dirt.
Yes, removing the random child from her protective embrace with Jinx shouldn't be a problem. Caitlyn would and does risk shooting towards Jinx with Vi and random child in the way anyway, but none of that happens, and this pause results in Vi and Caitlyn being separated from Jinx, even though Vi is equipped with gauntlets that were designed to pick up and smash apart the kind of rock separating them.
I keep telling myself that you're different, but you're not. It's her blood in your veins.
After deciding to give up, Caitlyn makes her first sudden flip-flop of an allegiance change. Angry Vi stopped her from shooting their target with the gun she now wallops her in the stomach with, ending what was to us a 10-minute long relationship. I won't right now get into how Caitlyn sort of continues her authoritarian crusade against the Undercity, also shown largely via montage, but this end of Act 1 is pretty much the end of the Vi vs Jinx plot you couldn't have been blamed for expecting to last a bit longer coming into the season. You might have even thought it would last the whole season, and that the season would spend longer fulfilling the Piltover vs Zorn conflict, thematically central to the sisters' complicated relationship. But no, that pot has been knocked off the cooker just as it was about to come to boil, continuing only in the spilled remnants left behind to quickly evaporate during Act 2 and 3. In episode 5, a music montage of course rushes through another crucial part of Vi's arc, her alcoholic spiral into underground pit fighting. While this montage isn't as tonally confused as the one accompanying the gassing of Zorn, it still unfolds so quickly it's difficult to understand or accept Vi's downward spiral. The idea she would give up so readily after losing Caitlyn and Jinx without, as far as we know, attempting to reconnect with another friend like Ekko, who the last she saw of was fighting Jinx on the bridge, where he could very well have been blown up and killed. In fact, Vi and Ekko don't exchange words in the whole season. Nothing in Act 1 has convinced me this isn't the same Vi who, after 7 years in prison, remains driven by the singular purpose of finding Jinx. So this brief arc feels like an unearned, over-the-top reaction to a relationship with someone she basically just met, pushing her further out of character.
Looking good, sis.
By the time Jinx shows up in Vi's tiny apartment, she's so deep in this depression spiral we initially think she's hallucinating. Despite the gravity of the reality, this Jinx is very much real and has brought with her the absurd, unbelievable news that Vander is alive. The robbery of Vi's narrative agency comes fully to fruition.
You think I need these to...
Vi just passively follows Jinx, not asking about this random child or the fate of Ekko, uncaring whether she's being led into a trap or making more of an effort to communicate through their major relationship issues beyond some petty insults and a brief scrap, the convenient consequences of which are that some spilled blood brings the monster they were searching for to them. It's my understanding that League fans had, since Season 1, speculated Vander would return as a character called Warwick, given various hints and Easter eggs connected to the game.
So you're Vander.
Hound of the Underground.
However, merely within the context of Arcane, Vander's return as this wolf-human hybrid is simply baffling.
Vander, no! It's me!
Vander surviving after episode 3 of season 1 is far-fetched on its own. Stabbed, fell to the bottom of a building on fire, mutated into a Shimmer Hulk, seemingly died, possibly of an overdose in Vi's arms, and his body supposedly disposed of by Silco's goons. Making Vander and his family disappear was kind of the point. So how did Silco's mad scientist, Singed, burned in that fire and therefore not present at the scene of Vander's death, secretly retrieve Vander's body and preserve what little life force he had left for what is, by Act 2 of Season 2, almost a decade? Combining Vander with some wolf monster may have been the secret to save him, sure. The story can invent regeneration immortality magic if it really wants to, but why does Singed turn him into a chaotic killing machine when his motivation for pursuing such science is to cure his daughter?
Death. Imagine a world that no longer need fear it.
The reason is that Warwick Vander is one of 2 of this season's plot device characters. I'm sure you can guess who the other one is. Warwick Vander is the worst of the 2 because he's tarnishing the memory of an important character from season 1 and because of how many instances of contrivance and convolution he's involved in. Singed can be considered another minor plot device himself. From inventing these important and arbitrarily powerful remedies, contributing to much of Zorn's suffering, he somehow orchestrates having the only real happy ending in the series, fulfilling an original goal we barely knew anything about. He comes out of his lab to attend a protest that, of course, gets interrupted. He summons Vander to break him out of prison by leaving a blood trail over a large enough body of water they had to ride a tram line to cross it. Vander can, from great distances, detect and is attracted to the blood of anyone else, but the blood of Singed acts like an especially potent activator that focuses his bloodlust, ignoring any of the other blood that would surely be spilled at some point across all of Zorn and Piltover, such as during the violent breakup of a protest. Even having deliberately summoned Vander, Singed still feels unsafe enough to lock himself inside his cell as soon as the beast is audibly nearby, suggesting he has no actual control over what it feels compelled to rip to shreds. Fortunately for Jinx, he recognizes her, snaps out of his bloodlust, and they leave the prison. But Singed decides to stay in his cell until Caitlyn and Ambessa arrive to question and recruit him to track down and enslave the beast for their army.
I've tracked him to Zorn.
Ambessa was impressed after miraculously surviving coming face to face with something otherwise shown to instantly obliterate everything in its path, including later her right-hand man Rictus, his competency second only to Singed throughout the season, though even less about him is known.
Our moment will come, but you must be prepared.
They find Vander, he melts from the inside for some reason and gets blown up, but Singed revives him again by combining him with Viktor to turn him into robot Vander. And then, despite Viktor disappearing and his robot hive mind army collapsing at the end of the series, Singed returns to his cozy home to find his now robot daughter still awake. That's the story of Singed, playing this nonsensical long game of morphing Vander's corpse with a wolf monster as a proof of concept for Ambessa to recruit him after he got imprisoned from attending a protest, so he can go and ask Viktor Jesus to save his daughter with a special privileged power that outlasts him, unlike the way he converted the other innocent Zorn citizens who joined his hive mind and became robots, but died with him when he disappeared. Meanwhile, and more importantly, Vander is essential to Vi and Jinx reconciling as quickly and completely as they do. Before barreling into and killing Vi in the mine shaft, he pulls us into a problematic flashback that plays like it's straight out of a fanfiction, diminishing the depth of Vander and Silco's ideological conflict by retconning their backstory in relation to Vi and Jinx's parents.
I'm knocked up.
Never mind the odd tension that had me briefly wondering whether Vander and Silco didn't know which of them was the father of Felicia's baby, not helped by the actual father remaining non-existent in the periphery. The idea that Vander and Silco were close to the family prior to Vi even being born, were close to her and Jinx when they were growing up, and explicitly promised their mother they'd fix Zorn to protect them.
You're not allowed to fail anymore. For her. For me.
Undermines Vander abandoning violence to adopt them after their parents died fighting in his revolution, and contradicts Silco wanting to kill them.
I've regretted that we've never had the opportunity to speak.
Vi and Jinx finding an unsent letter Vander had written to Silco.
If he found this, everything might have been different.
And the two of them being best buddies in an alternate timeline.
Greatest thing we can do in life is find the power to forgive.
Makes this even worse by suggesting their disagreement and mutual hatred were not so unfixable, and it wouldn't, for instance, take Silco adopting and loving a daughter of his own to understand Vander's perspective.
Oh, it all makes sense now, brother.
That Vander returned in any form already feels like an arsepull, but after Vi and Jinx take him to be healed by Jesus Viktor, and we get another bittersweet music sequence that deserves a better plot, and Jayce vaporizing Viktor causes Vander to melt from the inside, and then he gets vaporized, but then he returns again to be killed again as robot Vander, meaning Vi has experienced Vander's death 3 times. Well, it kind of seems like they ran out of ideas to fuel their melodrama. None of this melodrama, taking place in episode 8 and 9, lasts long enough for the sisters to meaningfully mourn Vander's second death. He was back as a monster thing, and so they just had to make up to get him fixed. He serves that purpose that maybe had some potential, but moves straight on to having to serve another purpose, revived as an unkillable mini-boss, as an excuse for Jinx to sacrifice herself, to remove her troublesome variable from a relationship the writers clearly didn't know how to write a mature or interesting conclusion to. The mouldy cherry on top is that Vi is left in the dark about Jinx's survival. I'm not convinced Vi would be able to stop blaming herself for the deaths of now both Vander and Jinx, so much so she doesn't mention them in her and Caitlyn's undeserved romantic epilogue.
Are you still in this fight, Violet?
Vi's character development doesn't conclude, it gets confused at the end of Season 1, and instead of fixing its direction, just halts at the start of Season 2 and occasionally farts out soft puffs of near-odorless air.
Sorry.
Vi goes from obsessing over finding powder, to obsessing over killing Silco, to obsessing over helping Caitlyn, to obsessing over having lost Caitlyn, to casually reuniting with and accepting Jinx because Vander showed up, and then back to obsessing over Caitlyn. Maybe if the trauma that should have been inflicted by her upbringing and prison time were acknowledged, I'd be able to believe her inconsistency and attachment issues, but it wasn't, and so I'm not. The Vi-Jinx conflict was the emotional core of the story, and sidelining, rushing through it, or forgetting it was a dire mistake that impeded the Piltover-Zorn conflict, appropriately culminating by association.
People always say, oh, when you work on something, you leave a piece of yourself. In this case, it's just like, it definitely took a chunk out of me. If there's anything that we can achieve with Arcane, past just the sheer entertainment, if there's just some good questions to ask for all of us and find our own answers, man, that's, I think, the best thing Arcane could do.
Vi flip-flops on Jinx almost as much as Caitlyn flip-flops on, well, everybody. It's not like there weren't on-the-nose hints that she could go down a dark dictator path, like close-ups on her angrily bared teeth as she expresses her disgust for Zorn after the memorial attack.
What kind of animals?
After her mother's death, and in the only scene her and Jayce converse all season, she does acknowledge how easily one can fall into hatred over a single violent act, but the memorial was just too much to bear, it seems. She does aim to dismantle what remains of Silco's Shimmer empire on top of stopping Jinx's attacks, but it's clear that just gets swept up with wanting revenge on Jinx, who she has failed to stop since Season 1. As with everyone else, the problem is that Caitlyn's development too quickly reaches one extreme before inexplicably, anticlimactically, and inconsequentially bouncing back the other way again. The sympathy for Zorn, which Caitlyn saw through Vi's eyes, that made up her entire arc of Season 1, is completely contradicted as she commits war crimes without introspecting that that is what she's doing. She starts off believing that it is Jinx, not Zorn as a whole, that was responsible, but somewhere in these time skips loses sight of that.
Can I get a minute?
Feeling as though she was suddenly made a dictator to get her out of the way of complicating Vi and Jinx reuniting, in the same way her and Vi's romance in Season 1 was speedrun to complicate Vi and Jinx reuniting.
Who's she?
Who are you?
It's okay. She's a friend. You're hot, Cupcake. So what'll it be, man or woman? She's a friend.
In episode 3, Vi and Caitlyn go from having their first kiss and swearing not to change,
Everyone in my life has changed. Promise me you won't change.
to Caitlyn claiming she thought Vi was different from the tainted evil blood of her sister.
I keep telling myself that you're different, but you're not. It's her blood in your veins.
Hitting her and then returning all the way back up to Piltover whilst Vi stays there crying. Despite her supposed determination, Caitlyn abandons Vi, her mission tour guide, and only indirectly continues the mission later because Ambessa puts her in power, her authority accepted without resistance from the council or from any more than one enforcer, even though everyone's perspective should be that a foreign warmonger is attempting a power grab after the disappearance of the two council members most vocally against her warmongering, Jayce and Mel.
Why is peace always the justification for violence?
As Ambessa's puppet, Caitlyn avoids accountability for inflicting martial law on Zorn to unsuccessfully continue her hunt for Jinx. Her contribution, an inconsistent Sherlock-esque detective insight that fails to apply to finding the hideout Jinx has been using since Season 1. In fact, the only useful info we see them acquire comes from Richter's picking a Jinxer out of a lineup and interrogating him about an upcoming protest that will take place in the most obvious of places, Vander's statue. Caitlyn in any way questioning Ambessa's methods and showing regret for her involvement in them is simplistically set up after episode 4's Paint the Town Blue montage, when she has a bedroom chat with her new girlfriend.
All you have to do is give the order.
Not without Jinx.
She does continue to go along with Ambessa's machinations until meeting back up with Vi in episode 6, but that montage, from the perspective of Zorn's rebels, is all we see of Caitlyn being full-on tyrannically evil, and even then, it's just as the face of Ambessa's tyranny.
Officer Nolan! Quite the familiar face these days.
Now is a good time to say the little there is to say about the Enforcer Avengers squad Caitlyn recruits along with Vi to hunt Jinx. Most notably this Maddie girl Caitlyn is now rebounding off of Vi with, who is involved in Ambessa's nonsensical plans. Piltover's Enforcer population is bizarrely small, but these Avengers are so inconsequential in terms of both narrative impact and skill that they still seem like they've been scraped from the bottom of some kind of nepotistic barrel. Caitlyn comes from an influential family and aspired to be an Enforcer as a child, and this is the best team she could gather. A nameless green guy fans have nicknamed Fishman, who wields a baton and places a bomb that doesn't explode on a cocoon with nothing inside it. A shield guy who becomes Vi's drinking buddy whilst she mistakes him for Vander like once or twice, eventually stationed on a defenseless Hexgate cannon device and unceremoniously killed by a few shallow arrow wounds, and a tiny Scottish ginger woman whose overly friendly introduction instantly raised my red flag that she's a double agent, though since her sleeping with Caitlyn counts as next to nothing being done with that idea, her eventual confirmation to be a double agent still comes as an idiotic, artificial surprise.
I did appreciate your warmth.
They do not deserve and never go on to earn their hero team lineup moment. We don't know where they came from or where they might have gone had they not been treated like unseasoned concepts of characters that might have had more development in a longer series. The shield guy isn't a long-lost son of Vander, Maddie isn't the daughter of an enforcer Caitlyn looked up to, or better yet, the daughter of Marcus from Season 1, and the Fishman isn't related to the chef from Season 1, perhaps coming from Zorn and therefore relating to whatever conflicted feelings Vi should be having about their operation. They don't even take part in the episode 3 confrontation with Jinx, as Vi and Caitlyn decide to disband the group before venturing that deep.
Junior Officer Nolan. Maddie.
Maddie is at least a character with lines and a known name, but the writers still didn't commit the time to what they seem to have been aiming for with her. We don't know whether she was always a Noxus plant, or if Ambessa recruited her at some point after Caitlyn became a political puppet, planted to keep tabs on Caitlyn, but failing to prevent Ambessa being blindsided by her helping Vi, and then, if she has any genuine feelings at all, which she claims she did, jealous or angry that Caitlyn tosses her aside to get back together with Vi. She is established neither as an important or interesting love interest or an effective spy. Her last-minute betrayal in the final battle, concluding with her bullet ricocheting with amusing accuracy off a magic shield around Caitlyn, placed blindly from behind a door from which Mel makes her entrance, having gained said magic powers in a plotline independent of almost everyone else.
I'm one of you? A mage?
This is an issue with Mel being misused, and Ambessa's motivations and the actions she takes to meet her vague goals making no sense. Both of their loosely connected plotlines among those most uncomfortably jammed into Season 2. In Season 1, Mel uses Jayce and his hex tech to make Piltover economically prosperous and tries not to become the warhawk her mother is, supporting the attempt to make peace with Silco through the independence of Zorn. Her and Jayce are romantically involved, but after her latent magical powers save her and those closest to her from Jinx's rocket, a passive protection apparently conscious of activating only when Mel's life is in actual mortal danger, their relationship goes nowhere as they are both separate from each other and everyone else for the majority of Season 2. Mel gets abducted by this magical black rose thing Ambessa has shown interest in using Hextech to fight against. After Act 1 of Season 2, all of Mel's Season 1 political build-up is neglected in favour of becoming this magic user the creators are clearly eager to set up a spin-off series involving. Mel, Caitlyn and Jayce could have had some interesting conflict about how to dismantle Zorn's Chem-Baron empire, use Hextech to promote equality, and find Jinx, but none of them reckon with being complicit in the poverty and oppression that have resulted in these tensions.
We know who's really pulling the strings.
The Black Rose subplot isn't nearly defined enough to replace the narrative interest of Mel's political maneuverings, nor does it meaningfully contribute to her family dynamics. After being kidnapped, Mel hangs out being thoroughly untested by their shallow illusions of some puzzle prison and a fake copy of her dead brother we know nothing about. Leaves having fully awakened the powers she used to break out, but which we never find out anything about, walking from God knows where, and conveniently arrives back in Piltover just in time to participate in the fight against Ambessa, who, strangely, had chosen to team up with magic robot Viktor Jesus.
Imagine, child, an army that need never fear death.
After Rictus was torn apart by Vander, Ambessa inherited whatever magical protective runes were wrapped around his weapon, without which she and, seemingly, anyone else are threatened by being easily teleported and imprisoned by the Black Rose, just like Mel was. In their 2-on-1 fight against Ambessa, Caitlyn and Mel are only able to win by removing said protective runes so she can be imprisoned, which Mel inexplicably interferes with, quickly and powerfully enough to defeat Black Rose Lady, but slowly enough that Ambessa still dies. Complete nonsense. Why didn't the Black Rose people just kill Ambessa at any point she wasn't accompanied by Rictus in the past? What do they want from her if not death? Maybe some League lore can explain this, but as previously discussed, one of Season 1's major strengths was viewers not requiring any previous lore knowledge to understand the story. Ignoring whatever explanation the writers try to shoehorn in, Ambessa exists to help establish a big threat for Piltover and Zorn, or at least a handful of representatives of Piltover and Zorn to put aside their differences to unite against, not ignoring those explanations, which are, as she claims, to protect her family with totally not magic weaponry. Why, for instance, does Ambessa orchestrate a memorial attack to increase tensions between Piltover and Zorn when that attack jeopardizes the lives of her secret spy, her daughter, and one of 2 or maybe 3 guys who knows how to use Hextech?
How could I not secure the scientists?
It's obvious to us the entire time that Ambessa is behind this attack. Caitlyn fails to investigate or think about long enough to involve in her reasoning to betray Ambessa.
They must have had help from someone up here.
So that reveal at the end of Act 1 falls completely flat, and only serves to ensure we never buy into Caitlyn actually going down this dark path of her own volition. Don't worry, your favourite character is redeemable.
How long were you sidled up with that shifty, self-serving war pig? She oinked poison in your ear and you just ate it. I know!
If desperation was meant to justify Ambessa's magic hypocrisy and general idiocy, such as hiring random scientists to needlessly vaporize themselves in attempts to harness Hextech in Jayce's absence, or how about fully committing to a convoluted plan with a hive mind who will abandon her or take over her army along with the rest of the world, as is his goal, then the series fails to portray her having the internal struggles to support it. Even what little we hear of her Noxian principles during her and Caitlyn's sparring session is confusing, and that's meant to be the scene of spoon-feeding exposition of what the hell Ambessa's deal is.
Too much force exposes you to risk.
Indeed.
Anyway, Caitlyn goes through half an episode's worth of screen time of this substanceless arc before reuniting and teaming back up with Vi in episode 6 to help save Vander, a conversation the episode of course cuts away from, so we don't actually know what Vi informs her on to convince her. Instead, the episode chooses to reveal they've teamed up in a weak plot twist flashback of their cliche planning for Caitlyn to pretend to arrest Vi so she can get close to Ambessa and miraculously subdue her with a stupidly risky move involving Caitlyn's electrocuting net grenade, as though if Ambessa weren't momentarily put asleep, she alone would immediately thwart their basic attempt to get Vander out of the camp unnoticed. Caitlyn was unaware of Jinx's involvement in the situation until witnessing their family hug, and at this point, who knows if she would have refused to help if she was. This seems odd, given that between accusing Vi of being just like Jinx in episode 3 and the reappearance of Vander she has just been informed of, Caitlyn should expect, or at least contemplate the possibility, that Vi would have teamed back up with Jinx in order to help Vander. Regardless, after Vander melts and explodes, Caitlyn finds herself in the favourable position of having regained some grasp on her relationship with Vi and finally arrested Jinx.
Arrested?
Vi is upset as her brain-damaged brain struggles to understand why Caitlyn might have gone through with arresting the schizophrenic mass-murdering terrorist she's been hunting since season 1, being served to her on a silver platter. In her first, I guess unselfish act of this season, Caitlyn takes her hands off the wheel by ensuring no guards will be stationed outside Jinx's cell when Vi predictably goes to free her. Vi does indeed try to free her, but after having some quiet time to stew in her depression, Jinx feels more burdensome than ever, locking Vi in the cell and leaving on her own so that Vi and Caitlyn can be happy together without her craziness getting in the way. An unknown duration of Vi being stuck in the cell later, during which an impending battle against Ambessa and a god should be everyone's primary concern to prepare for, Caitlyn turns up to see whether the sisters left as she expected, but finds herself presented with the opportunity to indulge in the other possibility that she would, for lack of a better term, win Vi from Jinx. Initiating an end-of-the-world sex cutscene, Vi gladly reciprocates. It's sad that Vi has been reduced to this buff, brain-damaged love machine to be pulled in whichever direction the most recent friendly face desires from her. Not only is Ambessa an imminent threat whilst Vi and Caitlyn get busy reaching the climax of their inconsistent romantic fluctuations in a dingy concrete cube, but Vi overlooks Jinx going to do whatever ominous breaking the cycle thing she was convinced of by a shoehorned hallucination of Silco. At best, leaving the city never to be seen again, at worst the actual reality of taking her own life. At least those are the best and worst options the show gives. Actually, the best would be working through and healing her issues alongside Vi, and the worst would be killing everyone in Piltover and Zorn and then leaving to destroy somewhere else. Not to mention the most surface level reading of this scene is the supreme leader of Piltover facilitating the release of a terrorist so she can cheat on her subordinate with an emotionally vulnerable homeless orphan who should be traumatized by the inside of a prison cell and realistically, after taking part in the gassing of Zorn, has no one else and nowhere else to depend on for safety or any sense of family.
Everyone in my life has changed. Promise me you won't change.
Since Jinx doesn't end up killing herself, or, as Vi might assume, fleeing Piltover, because if Vi truly thought she was suicidal, she would surely have gone running after her, she remains a disruptive force in the balance of their 3 lives until, after appearing towards the end of the battle, melodramatically sacrificing herself in front of Vi. Caitlyn chooses not to tell Vi she suspects Jinx is alive, ostensibly to spare her from the endless pursuit of her sister, but also, of course, because she will happily take Vi's love for herself, and she will have Vi all to herself because neither of them have substantially interacted with any of the other remaining characters all season. Caitlyn and Vi's power dynamic remains precarious to the end, with Vi referring to herself as the dirt Caitlyn will never be able to clean out from under her fingernails, perhaps intended as a cute little bit of PG-friendly flirting, but concerningly reminiscent of the still very much problematic societal inequalities of the Piltover-Zorn feud we shouldn't pretend has yet been fixed as much as a brief montage in the last minutes of the final episode tries to suggest it's on the precipice of being.
Our story isn't over.
Can a monster ever be forgiven? I don't know.
Besides who on the council suffers death or injury from Jinx's rocket, Season 1's cliffhanger includes where Jinx as a character is heading next. She accidentally killed the father figure who, after many years of witnessing and now first-hand experiencing Jinx's unpredictable wrath, still in his dying breath, deemed her unworthy of giving up for the peace deal Jayce offered Zorn.
I never would have given you to them. Not for anything.
Jinx sits in the Jinx chair and fires an attack she can't predict the destruction of, but lucid and calm in her desire to damage the tall symbol of oppression that has led her down this path. sorrowful over what embracing this identity means for Powder, abandoning the idea she can, after all that's happened, revert to the sister Vi has been fighting for. It's not a moment of transformation, but an acceptance that she already long ago transformed. A change she isn't necessarily happy with, but perhaps hopes embracing will better free herself from being tormented by. Framed not as an act of political resistance, but as an emotional outburst, as Jinx's attack on the council is, we can't have gone into season 2 expecting her to, for instance, immediately don Silco's crown in continued but all the more violent defiance of Piltover. The Jinx begins the season aimless, alone, even suicidal, and only later goes on to be involved in a resistance movement is a believable direction for her to take. The bare bones of that idea doesn't ruin her character, but by the now typical means of music montages and contrived side characters, Jinx's involvement in any meaningful uprising unfortunately remains tepid and passive.
Where is she?
If anything, the season is eager to backtrack on her being a villain as quickly as possible.
Officer Kiraman witnessed the attack firsthand. She confirmed this was the act of a single deranged individual.
Jinx.
For starters, in order for Jinx to not be Zorn public enemy number 1, the Piltover Council has to not spread word, based on Vi and Caitlyn's first-hand account, that Jinx alone is responsible for the rocket attack and in so doing ruined Silco's aspirations for Zorn independence. Also, Jinx killed Silco. The Council was, after admittedly little deliberation, voting on a peace deal, so why would they kill him? Nobody in Zorn, none of the Chem Barons panicking to fill the power vacuum Silco left behind, or Sevika, who in season 1 joined Silco's side in betrayal of Vander precisely because she wanted more severe action to be taken. Here's rumours, or has it crossed their minds, that maybe it wasn't Piltover that screwed them over this time. Maybe Silco's crazy adopted daughter, known for complicating things and killing people, did in fact complicate things worse than ever before by killing people more important than ever before. The extent of Piltovian propaganda against Jinx is just to put a bounty on her head and pin up a bunch of wanted posters, largely ineffective and likely having the opposite effect given the lack of information for why and the perspective of most Zornites being they'd never give up one of their own.
We don't hand over our people.
Especially one they, by Act 2, collectively believe to have performed the colourful gas attack on Piltover. Certainly, more of them could be convinced to make an exception to this rule if they heard more about what a psycho Jinx is and how much she has screwed them over.
They want you alive.
Any attempt to capture her with her shimmer-powered super speed should be futile, but one of the more ambitious Chem Barons, a little robotized gremlin guy called Smeech, does actually get close, cornering Jinx in an alleyway outside the arcade from which she just evaded Caitlyn's chemical-spewing Avengers. Against Sevika's attempts to unite the Chem Barons against Piltover in Silco's absence, Smeech would rather hand Jinx over to decrease tensions and refill the money-making void himself, or something like that. I can't really remember, he's entertaining but he dies here. Whilst Sevika doesn't care for personal loyalty, evident by her betraying Vander and getting close to betraying Silco, she is loyal to whatever path she deems necessary to improve Zorn. It is therefore already a stretch that she cares about whether or not to give up Jinx, and then the season goes one step further in the two of them closely teaming up.
Don't suppose you can swim, huh, Lefty? Well,
the idea here is that Sevika inexplicably has nobody else remaining from Silco's gang to work with, such as to help fix her robot arm, and that they somewhat bond over having lost Silco. But even not knowing Jinx killed Silco, these two hated each other in season 1, and the fact that at no point does Sevika or anyone else find out Jinx killed Silco means their relationship has nowhere to go.
I am Jinx!
Sevika becomes the straight man sidekick trying to motivate Jinx to do anything, a forgotten remnant of a resistance movement ignited by their improbably large-scale smoke attack at the end of Act 1 that she seemingly lacks the charisma to fuel during Act 2, at which point, despite somehow becoming the face of the resistance, Jinx is busy isolating with her new best friend, Random Child.
No! What are you doing? Show some effort!
This is Isha, the second of Arcane Season 2's major plot device characters, along with Vander. She is introduced at the end of an episode 2 music montage, saved from some goons after falling on top of Jinx and following her around from then on. We can assume she was an escaped child labourer, but has no confirmed backstory and continues to exist only as an extension of Jinx, coming across either as a placeholder concept of a character they might write into the season but forgot to add substance to when they did, a character artificially inserted into the story late in production, lacking interaction with other characters and not even having any dialogue so they don't have to hire a last-minute voice actor, or a character in a parody movie wearing around their head a glowing halo at all times rotating the words "Death incoming, very sad, please cry." This laughably weak attempt at emotionally manipulative melodrama we're supposed to believe changes Jinx enough to redeem her in Vi's eyes, a perfectly idealized version of Powder for Jinx to reflect on, unrealistically effective at fixing her trauma and even competently posing as Jinx in order to inspire Zorn in her place. An undercooked attempt to give Jinx the same arc Silco had before her and Vander had before him. In practice, we really don't see all that much of this change or of Jinx introspecting that she has changed, besides literally saying out loud Isha reminds her of herself as Powder.
I thought I was rid of her for good, but you kind of remind me of her. Ever since you dropped into my life, it's like I put on glasses.
Jinx is happy when she's with Isha and sad when Isha is gone, whether because she liked having someone look up to her, liked looking after a little sister, or believed she could give Isha the childhood she couldn't have as Powder is unclear. Either way, the example she sets for Isha gets the kid killed. The extent of Jinx's redemption arc is this. Isha shows up and gives her a non-destructive, motherly, but as far as we know, shallow purpose. Isha gets captured. Jinx wants to save Isha and may as well release all the other Jinxes there as well. They gratefully pat her on the shoulder when walking past like she's Spider-Man or something, and when she stays behind to stall the rampaging monster, she's very aware she's playing the hero.
You really are a
big fat hero.
All the Vander stuff happens, and when he's melting and fighting Ambessa's soldiers, Isha makes the absurd decision that can only be explained by Jinx's suicidal influence to run in and explode herself along with him. Whilst perhaps the most stirring music sequence of the season, used in case anyone missed that this was supposed to be sad, this of course falls flat due to Isha's lack of depth and the show's failure to acknowledge the influence Jinx has had on this pointless sacrifice. Clearly a naive child copying Jinx without understanding why she's doing this or what it will accomplish. I can only imagine her rather complex for a 6-year-old thought process in the middle of this chaos is that Jinx won't leave Vander behind and that he's clearly in pain and should be put out of his misery, but I'm unsure why she needs to get so close to blast him all in one shot with an overloaded gun that also vaporizes herself. And as it soon turns out, Vander remains intact enough to be revived even stronger than before. Her death and Vander's temporary death do not meaningfully advance the story or invest the audience in the same way the similarly predictable deaths of Milo and Clagger did in Season 1, who at least had personalities and were the first confirmation the series would be willing to brutally kill off its child characters. The only positive result of Isha's sacrifice is it somehow allows Caitlyn to escape Ambessa, but it also hospitalizes Vi and gets Jinx imprisoned, and then later they are both nearly killed or transitioned into the hive mind by the revived robot Vander, whose eventual actual demise at the hands of a single Jinx grenade while they're both plummeting into a massive chasm seems implausible compared to the weaker Vander surviving Isha's explosion. Isha's status as an ineffective narrative device is completed when, in life as in death, she isn't mentioned or acknowledged by anyone else besides Jinx, her demise failing to climactically infuse Act 2 with poignant tragedy. Not even Sevika is given a scene to acknowledge her passing, but then she never had anything to say to or about Isha before.
They got her.
What?
She came to the rally.
and I don't know what the hell she's even up to or where she is after the prison breakout, having moved beyond a lack of narrative agency to the land of non-existence. She should be concerned about the pattern befalling all those Jinx gets attached to, now a little kid, but as a character for the audience to attempt to care about, Isha is insultingly one-dimensional. Jinx's redemption gets picked back up in episode 8 when Caitlyn comes to visit her in prison.
Vi thinks you've changed.
She can't accept what you and I know.
By this point, Vi has already woken up from her injuries and had her argument with Caitlyn, and yet Caitlyn comes to talk with Jinx alone.
If you're here to kill me, make sure to finish the job.
Strange that Vi wouldn't go with her, or better yet, that they'd have their argument about releasing Jinx in front of her and she'd trap them both in the cell together. The argument giving Jinx proof her presence splits them apart, and being genuinely trapped giving them a reason to stay there and have sex instead of helping prepare for the battle. Someone else can let them out a bit later, but given how disconnected everybody's storylines are this season, I'm struggling to think who that might be. If the shield guy had been built up as an actual character, he would be ideal to give Vi a cheeky wink and nod, or maybe Maddie coming along and getting jealous with visual confirmation of Caitlyn's cheating.
I didn't know your mom was there. It probably wouldn't have made a difference, but I didn't know.
This interaction between Jinx and Caitlyn is an obligatory nothing burger, feebly bridging their earlier mutual hatred with a new vague forgiveness that's meant to justify them happily going their separate ways. It's not that it's empty for Jinx to say it wouldn't have mattered if she knew Caitlyn's mother was in the council chamber when she was deciding to fire the rocket, but that the truth is if she did know Caitlyn's mother was in the line of fire, it would have only motivated her further. This regret she shows is so mild, it comes across as downplaying the severity of her attack, and shouldn't convince Caitlyn she's changed enough to be deserving of release. Though I don't think anything Jinx could say or do should be able to convince Caitlyn of that.
Jinx, I think the cycle only ends when you find the will to walk away.
Whilst she's in here, Jinx has what could be considered a hallucination of Silco. However, given the healing qualities conveniently lasting past the loss of Isha, and that Silco is giving advice instead of tormenting her like previous hallucinations, it's more like she's using his voice to convey her own thoughts, albeit this interpretation is inaccurate to what she should understand Silco to have actually believed, as though Jinx's memories of him include his alternate reality self only we and Ekko at this time know about, let alone interacted with. But I can cynically view Silco's appearance here as mere fan service. Jinx theatrically burns down Vander's pub and Silco's office to, I guess, remove her existence from history, or maybe to commit to her end? Not really sure actually. Kinda seems like more shallow, unelaborated melodrama, and destroying a centerpiece of Zorn's peaceful era that a lot of the locals are probably nostalgic for. She doesn't burn down her secret base on the other hand, because that'll need to play a part in her Gandalf arrives at Helm's Deep moment, and Ekko needs to teleport there in connection with the same location in the alternate timeline.
I just want to talk to you, pal. Jinx.
Jinx's suicide is almost undermined by the contrivance and comedy of Ekko appearing out of nowhere to rewind the moment over and over in an attempt to convince her not to, including pointing out she was also blowing him up along with her.
See if I can talk an old friend out of blowing us up.
But it's only fully undermined when the scene cuts away from their reconciliation and they show up late into the final battle, having clearly spent a while dressing each other up. Did he tell her about the time travel device her alternate reality self helped him build, about all the other stuff going on with that reality? We must assume so, and I'll be going down that rabbit hole shortly. Jinx and Ekko's firelight making their dramatic entrance to the battle is jarring given Ekko has been absent from Zorn for quite a while, doesn't know any of the people involved like Ambessa and Viktor, and his firelights being the group who actively opposed Silco in Season 1, fighting Jinx to obstruct his business to the point of death and hating her because of that. They're coming to save the day from the robot hive mind and faceless Noxian soldiers, but so brazenly presenting them as cool heroes with Jinx's signature punk aesthetic exists in awkward contradiction to the tragedy of war depicted in the first scene of Season 1 and the final montage of Season 2. Fortunately for them, the only unambiguous deaths of recognizable good guys were characters without names or dialogue, and the sights being so disappointingly black and white ensures nobody cares about the casualties we can presume the losers suffered to an equal or greater extent. In leaving Piltover, Jinx avoids the difficulty of properly healing her and Vi's relationship, contrary to how Vander stayed to successfully rebuild Zorn and keep the peace after ending his own cycle of violence, antithetical to how the writers attempted to convey her potential for positivity through her relationship with Isha and the help she provided Ekko in that alternate reality. The unsatisfying resolution of Zorn's independence instead happens very briefly through Sevika, in a politically hollow moment of sitting down as the Zorn representative on the Piltover Council. Caitlyn probably pulled some Kiramin strings, as she has done before, but it would be more realistic if the Council kept neglecting Zorn for a bit longer, especially after just going through a huge attack from a robot cult leader from Zorn, as I can imagine their reasoning to deny Zorn a voice could be. It's hard to say whether having a seat at the Council means Zorn is actually independent, or if they just have a political voice now when we don't know the details of the arrangement and whether it proves to be worthwhile for Zorn. Sevika was outspoken about Zorn before, and she's the leftovers of Silco's faction here representing them now, instead of the morally and reputationally cleaner candidate of Ekko. If Heimerdinger was still around, he would surely be Ekko's most passionate advocate, the guy who, as a teenager, was running a safe haven for years during Silco's drug empire and just got back from a Zorn utopia he can use as the perfect blueprint.
There were definitely moments of being pretty overwhelmed, for sure. I mean, speaking for myself, I'm the kind of person, I work actually well under stress, except for when you have so many stressful things that you feel like you lose oversight, if that makes sense. You know, animation over there, music over there, voice talent, and you don't know if the scripts for less episodes are working, and you're planning for season 2, and there definitely are those moments where you just feels like it just is too much, you know? I think that's why the burnout rate for, I think, showrunners is like 100% in general.
So what's the deal with these two, and why hasn't alternate reality rendered them so absent from the story? Heimerdinger was always a weird character, and not just because he's Arcane's uniquely whimsical, fluffy version of Yoda.
Oh, you can't make a prototype without breaking a few wrenches.
He's old and allegedly wise, and he's seen firsthand the destruction magic can cause, founding Piltover to escape that. There was, in Season 1, some nuance of him allowing Hextech to make slow progress within the confines of safeguards, but that wasn't going to be quick enough within everyone else's shorter lifespans to fix the rampaging societal problems in the immediate present, which Jayce and Mel use as their reason to vote him off the council. The arc of Heimerdinger realizing how his negligence has contributed to the inequality had only just gotten started, walking the streets of Zorn until meeting Ekko and visiting his sanctuary, but Season 2 fails to take his positive contributions to Zorn and the Zorn-Piltover relations beyond being a goofy mascot making toys to entertain groups of kids. Whatever serious layer he previously hid under his whimsical personality has wasted away, and, contrary to his wise old age and evident inventing potential, all of his actions come across as small side quests he waddles upon and absent-mindedly contributes to, ignorant to the fact he long ago outlevelled the difficulty of the main quest.
Oh, this is quite troubling.
That tree means so much.
Concerned about the health of the sanctuary's mysterious tree, Ekko and Heimerdinger go in search of Jayce or Viktor. Heimerdinger would have the easiest time out of anyone getting permission to enter Piltover's most secure science experimenty areas for a one-on-one meeting with whoever he wishes, if he isn't already able to waltz in unannounced because he practically built the place. However, instead, he takes this opportunity when Piltover is still recovering from a major attack to fulfill a fantasy of sneaking in via a childish imitation of Mission Impossible, or insert any other generic sneaking into a building scene. I can't say being frivolous is out of character, but it does come across like a tone-deaf excuse to avoid Heimerdinger having to involve himself in any wider events or interact with more than 2 characters at once all season.
Don't you essentially own this place?
Shh!
at least establish that it was necessary for them to break in through a secret route only Heimerdinger knows about, such as that the whole building is on strict lockdown after the attacks, and Ekko wouldn't be allowed in even if Heimerdinger would be, or more simply, that Jayce requested nobody be let near his office because he's sad his peace deal got ruined by the technology he created.
Every action sparks a reaction. Oh, all sockets.
Heimerdinger and Jayce haven't been in the same room since the blindside that kicked him off the council, yet after meeting here, they failed to discuss any of the events that have since transpired with the seriousness they require, such as how they feel about each other, the gassing of Zorn, or the past dangers of magic and the future dangers of Hextech. Heimerdinger should really elaborate upon. In regards to Ekko's tree, they get into exposition about wild runes.
Most places the arcane is dormant, but here and there, it's more active, and wild runes are...
Sort of like its fingerprints.
Exactly.
Jayce uses runes as a language to communicate with the arcane in his devices, and hypothesizes wild runes are where the barrier between the physical realm and the arcane realm grows thin enough that magical anomalies seep through, suggesting too high a concentration or too frequent a use of magic can dangerously disturb the natural order of things. Pretty typical fantasy stuff, but quite a bit of important world building for such a casual conversation, and not expanded upon or even really revisited, not even the health of Ekko's tree, beyond this obligation to set up the contrived plot point of Jayce, Heimerdinger and Ekko going on a field trip down to an underground failsafe, built to absorb the hex gates overloading that so happens to be corrupting the deepest parts of Zorn it's connected to. Hard to imagine Viktor, who grew up in and owes his illness to Zorn's poor air quality, who was conflicted about Mel's political manipulations of Jayce in Season 1, and who holds his life purpose as helping people with science, would be willing to risk Zorn's ventilation or worse. Viktor seemed ready to abandon Hextech altogether after trying to heal himself, accidentally killed a single person who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but there should be a middle ground between complete abandonment of the technology and the weapon-producing, dark magic-infused stuff Jayce and Viktor get carried away with. The problem here is that, whilst the failsafe is the kind of unsafe, huge-scale use of Hextech Heimerdinger should have prevented, the show wants to brush over the idea humans misusing technology is what makes it detrimental, so it can treat the arcane itself as fundamentally unmanageable.
Is that a wild rune? I have no idea what that is.
In the failsafe room, they discover that Viktor fusing with the hex core pushed something too far, and in the face of some glitching anomalies, they're all like, inconceivable and what have we done, in case the dramatic consequences weren't vague enough. These glitches extend to all the Hextech gadgets, including those Vi, Jinx, Caitlyn and Sevika are currently finding themselves conveniently prevented from killing each other with. Whilst it could have just been music video aesthetics, the crazy repetitious patterns of the surreal white void they have found themselves in, and when Jayce gets struck by flashbacks and swings his big hammer, teleported by, predictably indicates there's some multiverse shenanigans going on, prior to that being confirmed when these three show up again in Act 3. The longer they remain absent in Act 2, the less mysterious their destination is.
No. It can't be.
It's at the start of Act 3, for the entirety of Episode 7, that we spend trapped in this alternate reality. Actually, it's two alternate realities, but we won't talk about the one Jayce is separately transported to just yet. I say trapped because Ekko and Heimerdinger are both trapped here until they invent their way out, and because the audience is narratively trapped with characters that might share the names and looks of those in the original reality, but have no influence on them or the wider plot, outside of whatever the hell we can assume Ekko tells Jinx when he gets back. In other words, despite a popular opinion on this episode being that it's the best in a deeply flawed season because it lets us breathe in one space for the longest, it is wasting an entire episode's worth of screen time on barely consequential fanfiction in a season that was already severely pressed for time back in Act 1. And if not that, it's still committing the grave sin of introducing the inevitable convolution of time travel and multiverses into a story without such concepts at its very centre, not ingredients I can say I've seen improve an already half-cooked dish. Ekko and Heimerdinger are both supplanted into the minds of their alternate selves, but Heimer inexplicably arrived quite a while earlier, whimsically tracking the exact length of time he's been waiting.
1,128 days, 6 hours, and 20 minutes, give or take.
but having seemingly made no more progress than the goofing around he was doing in their home reality, and remaining disinterested in returning to circumvent the Hextech doom he was outspoken about in Season 1 until Ekko expresses and works towards his desire to do so. He and Ekko do, however, share an insane indifference towards the minds and lives of those they have supplanted, such as whether they're dead, in a coma, or imprisoned and unable to act whilst watching someone else pilot their bodies.
Did you just throw that?
There is also the issue, given they decide against revealing their true identities to anyone, that they are now imposters without accurate knowledge of specific details of this world and the lives of its inhabitants. A mentally sane Powder, Milo and Clagger being alive, Silco and Vander being best buddies, etc. All blatant evidence these aren't the same people they left behind at home. But apparently not blatant enough for Ekko not to have weird outbursts everyone's collective intelligence should recognise to be a major change in behaviour, if not concern them over the cause of gaps in knowledge so large he doesn't, for instance, know Vi died years ago during their heist of Jayce's apartment.
It was a mistake to come here.
What's that supposed to mean?
Alternate Powder is upset by his inappropriate attitude towards her and such events, but brushes off that he's at best being a dickhead to her, and at worst completely lost his mind.
I had this dream where things went another way.
Zorn developing into this utopia is largely attributed to that divergence of Vi dying in the explosion at Jayce's apartment and Hextech being permanently abandoned. That, and Silco receiving the letter of apology or some other form of apology from Vander. The idea something so simple could mend the deep conflict of such a fractured relationship unconvincing and somewhat insulting. The writers forcing this truth that peace was so close, following the scene of Vi and Jinx discovering that unsent letter in Episode 5.
Everything might have been different.
The alternate timeline is overly heavy-handed in its portrayal of what could have been we already got quite the heavy dose of in Vander's flashbacks and memories, and unfortunately it just feels contrived. That Vander and Silco made up after nearly killing each other is one thing, but Zorn thriving and Piltover having no separate higher presence oppressing them at all, supposedly just because Hextech didn't go anywhere, is just bizarre. In this reality, the world was at one point unequal enough for Vander and Silco to have their rebellion and disagreement, but not so unequal Piltover overlooked the death of one thief. Regardless of whether there existed a Viktor to help Jayce pick Hextech back up or not kill himself, how was Vi dying such a wake-up call that Zorn prospers and Piltover just isn't relevant? With so little illumination on what actually happened in this timeline's history, Hextech is left as the be-all and end-all of Zorn's suffering, distracting from what the writers forgot or never fully understood to be the thematic core of Season 1, of Piltover sowing the seeds of rebellion through their oppression of Zorn. Yes, Hextech may have allowed them to leave Zorn even further behind in the dust, but it's not impossible Jayce, Mel, Heimerdinger and most certainly Viktor would come to use the power of Hextech to uplift Zorn alongside them.
What about our pledge to improve lives? For those in need? For the Undercity?
The Atlas Gauntlets. The mining colonies in the fissures can work faster and without fatigue.
Jayce may be ignorant to how his gauntlets wouldn't actually free the miners from fatigue, at least fatigue isn't the primary issue there, but through interacting with Vi could come to comprehend Piltover's exploitation of Zorn just like Caitlyn did. Hextech's mere existence shouldn't be a boogeyman. Like any new technology, how the system it was created in uses it is what's important.
Tampering with the Arcane never ends well, lad. The risk is far too great. Oh, blast nozzles. How could I forsake a brilliant lad in need?
Ekko retrieves the remnants of Hextech crystals that weren't cleaned up from Jayce's apartment, which Heimerdinger never thought to investigate in his 3 years alone here. In not wanting to introduce Hextech to such an idyllic reality, he might have wanted to keep them safe or destroy them, but after Ekko wants to return home, he is suddenly willing to oversee their use to invent time travel, like the most perilous technological concept imaginable. They manage to crack a limited form of time travel pretty quickly, and the writing wastes no time arbitrarily bending its vague rules for plot convenience. Through trial and error, Ekko finds the limit of this handheld device to be rewinding 4 seconds, because going further inexplicably makes Heimerdinger explode. This is apparently undoable by just going forward the seconds that were just rewound, but given the time taken to react to Heimerdinger exploding, the rewind window would soon move past the range that or anything else would be fixable. Once you get into this territory, it's futile trying to apply hard rules to things the writers clearly brushed under the rug the moment their plot points were facilitated. Like, why are bits of exploded Heimerdinger still on Ekko afterwards, effectively duplicating matter that should no longer exist? Why doesn't Ekko explain why the limit is 4 seconds in case Heimerdinger decides to try it for himself and explodes without anyone nearby to fix it? Why doesn't Heimerdinger inquire more closely at all before spending that night single-handedly expanding the idea into a multiversal teleportation pad? The 4-second limit doesn't matter anyway, because Ekko just overrides it to save himself and the world in the final battle against an omniscient robot entity who is baffled by the existence of a device built by 2 uneducated teenagers and a talking hamster in 2 weeks, in a chasm Powder still uses as her secret base in this reality, just so when Ekko goes back to his home reality, he's in the right place to stop Jinx killing herself. Also, as long as Ekko rewinds to a point he still has the device equipped, can't he just keep doing so indefinitely, making the actual limit far longer than 4 seconds? A better approach might have been for the device to set a save point Ekko can return to, instead of the impossible to comprehend trial and error of gradually redoing his actions by rewinding 4 different seconds in random intervals. He'll be forced to perfect a whole sequence the audience understands the stakes of, and then execute a single flawless run of that sequence before accumulating so much total damage he can fight no longer. For some reason, they decided Ekko leaving behind the happiness of this nice reality, including the weirdly unethical romance he developed with alternate Powder, wasn't emotional enough and needed Heimerdinger dying in an absurd self-sacrifice, resulting from his own incompetent oversight of forgetting to plug something in, leaving the teleportation pad to plug it in, and getting vaporized. This scene of Ekko's departure, and frankly the whole episode, don't work emotionally because of its basic long-winded function of indirectly redeeming our Jinx through alternate Powder. A big self-sacrificial send-off, however artificial and unacknowledged it goes by every other character, is just an obligation to generate social media buzz, as was the unnecessary Ekko Powder romance we're supposed to feel bittersweet about after Jinx leaves Ekko all alone at the end of episode 9, with little indication he'll get to using his knowledge of the alternate reality to finish what he and his magic tree started in season 1. Simultaneously, but also entirely separately, I'm expecting alternate reality Powder to use the leftover hex crystals she puts for safekeeping in her drawer to make a new time machine she now knows how to build in order to go on her own adventure into an alternate reality to see the Vi Ekko painted an unusually accurate mural of, because why wouldn't she do that? It's not like there was any plot involving her realizing time travel is probably actually quite bad and that she shouldn't risk it to fulfill an interaction with someone who will only resemble the Vi she knew. Maybe her taking hex tech further on her own is even what causes the apocalypse timeline Jayce gets sent to. Who knows? Anyway, Ekko and Heimerdinger are ruined, though I can't say there was much there to begin with. Heimerdinger stuck around in the story to get Ekko into the failsafe room so he could get time travelled like Jayce, so he could build a plot device to save the world. Ekko went from fighting Jinx as the leader of a genuinely revolutionary faction of Zorn in season 1 to being an entirely unpolitical tech genius who falls in love with an alternate Jinx in season 2 and introduces the possibly inevitably destructive hex tech to a reality that was doing perfectly well without it.
It's like, die, or, you know, like, accept some things being imperfect, you know, or something like that. That's kind of like the other path, right? That would be the way that they could go back to humanity.
I think we need to find a big structure. We feel we can simplify it.
The big hope, I guess, with this trip to Fortiche is to lock down the final episodes of season 2. The end that I won't talk about very much is one that is complex.
What else do you want to remove?
You can remove also the...
There's one thing about the ending that is new. We're like, oh, that's sort of the same beat we had in 206. Okay, that was sort of the thing we were hinging this whole episode around, and now it's not there anymore, so let's just redo the whole thing.
This part, I think, is just a particularly hard part of stories. Getting from your middle to the, okay, on track, final run on the Death Star, you know, that kind of location.
So Ekko and Heimerdinger waste a bunch of screen time getting caught up in and dragged along with Jayce and Viktor's multiversal time travel shenanigans, but the latter duo's development is all the more destructive to Arcane's overall story. Let's rewind a little to how these two characters were already on shaky ground in Act 1. Because of Mel's magic, she and those closest to her miraculously survived Jinx's rocket, something nobody, including investigator Caitlyn, notice or mention in questioning why every other member of the council was killed or so much more severely injured when they were further away from the rocket. Jayce carries Viktor to their lab, rummages through some hex tech notes, and forces a magical procedure onto Viktor using the hex core he told Jayce he wants destroyed, knowing it will be at the expense of his life, because when he tried using it before, it accidentally killed his assistant. This desperation to go against his friend's wishes to save his life, I can sort of understand, but for something portrayed so quickly that goes against Jayce's prior hesitation to even create hex tech weapons, as though wanting to speed past the point we think about it a little too much, it doesn't align with how Viktor merging with the hex core is so casually moved on from, and then goes on to be so narratively significant it railroads Season 2 into a save the world plot. There wasn't a scene in Season 1 or 2 of Jayce contending with his own refusal to destroy the hex core, as could have created a genuine rift between him and Viktor. No, he just didn't get around to it, and decides to use something he barely understands as experimental medicine on someone he'd already had a while to anticipate the death of.
He was right next to me. How does the explosion do that to him? And I just walk out without a scratch.
Viktor.
This time, Jayce spends moping on his own keeps him away from being politically involved in the aftermath of Jinx's attack, when at the end of Season 1 he was the most influential force pushing for peace with Zorn in order to circumvent the weaponization of Hextech. In his absence from the council, Mel loses the vote of whether to strike back at Zorn for Jinx's attack, and when Caitlyn decides she'll go in with a limited task force, Jayce is suddenly again willing to forge Hextech weapons for them, perhaps to ensure their small mission is successful so no further military action is taken, but his continued disinterest and moping about until getting teleported away with Ekko and Heimerdinger just allows Ambessa to come in and blatantly arrange things in what is apparently, but doesn't really seem to be, her favour. The most blatant example of Ambessa's manipulations was her decision to send her highly recognisable right-hand man to recruit a chem baron, one whose desire for revenge against Jayce she somehow uncovered, despite neither Jayce or Vi admitting they called off their mission after killing her kid. They continue to withhold that death might just be the real motivation behind the memorial attack, not that it was part of Zorn's larger collective effort to incite chaos, a personal act of vengeance taken advantage of by Ambessa to further divide Piltover and Zorn. Withholding such information straight up sabotages Mel's efforts to de-escalate the trouble her mother is brewing, receiving insight from the cat lady attending to Salo, a plot that goes nowhere after Mel enters her magic era.
All they did is piss me off.
Caitlyn, thinking this was Zorn's attack, gives her reason to believe Jinx and or Zorn are heartlessly attacking memorials without provocation, fueling the vengeful hatred Ambessa uses to control her. Meanwhile, and for the duration of Jayce's alternate reality vacation, Viktor is guided to a specific spot in Zorn that so happens to be the location of Jinx and Vi's childhood home, where he cures people of shimmer addiction along with anything else, and builds a commune our prior story experience recognizes the sinister red flags of, but is nonetheless an act of genuine benevolence from Viktor. The ghost of Viktor's assistant, Skye, communicates with him in some shared mental space within the Arcane, seemingly sincere, as nothing is made of whether the Hex Core is using her likeness to manipulate Viktor, taking advantage of his desire to help people down the dark path of spreading this magic too far into forcing everyone to be part of an inhumane hive mind. Like everyone else, his transformation simply occurs too quickly to be believed. The help his powers provide to Vander, for instance, Jayce contradicts the creepiness of invading the minds of his subjects, and how one-dimensionally villainous he becomes the second Singed uses his green goo to help him complete his ascension into an unkillable god, help he previously refused but was given no choice but to accept after Jayce destroyed his body. This commune has been thriving without interference for, at this point, who knows how long, when Jayce reappears in this reality in the failsafe room, where he's greeted with Sallow, the council guy wheelchair-bound by Jinx's attack, now part of Viktor's whole thing after the cat lady mentioned rumours of a miracle-performing guy who might be able to heal his legs. I don't know how Sallow got inside here without Jayce's hammer to unlock the door, but perhaps Viktor already had or devised his own key in desperation to acquire these Hextech batteries Sallow was transporting. I guess just so Viktor looks somewhat more evil behind the scenes, like he's storing energy for a big event or something. Episode 5 ends on the cliffhanger of Jayce squishing the defenseless, innocent Sallow with one laughably brutal slam of his hammer. Clearly, he didn't like going through whatever made him so haggard, which I imagined to be years spent fighting a war against a Hextech army, like Kyle Reese from the Terminator, although I guess Jayce's goals actually more closely resemble that of the Terminator, and his immediate antagonism only makes things worse. In episode 6, Jayce, the most famous man in Piltover, takes his big hammer all the way down to Viktor's commune, makes his way inside without being noticed or stopped by any of the other major characters who have gathered here, and without attempting to use his alternate reality knowledge to convince Viktor to stop. In other words, having an actual conversation, he just shoots Viktor with his hammer laser, fast forwarding the very apocalypse he wishes to avoid by denying Viktor the ability to provide his at this time small and relatively harmless purpose of physically healing the suffering Zornites who find him. The emotions that should be involved in such a drastic event in their relationship are hindered by the lack of context for Jayce's actions and the lack of interaction between the two of them since season 1. We accept Jayce was trying to take out the hive mind cult before it got too powerful because that's a narrative trope, but nothing actually in this series suggests Viktor's intentions were sinister until his body is destroyed. He really did just want to help people. Also, there just isn't much mystery about why Jayce did this to begin with. We've been beaten over the head with the idea Hextech and magic in general are unambiguously dangerous from the beginning of the series. Viktor is visibly overusing magic, and Jayce comes back from some traumatic experience probably involving magic and decides to end it before it's too late. All the whilst the dialogue between them forces a hateful superhero-supervillain rivalry previously undeveloped and easily backtracked on at the end of the season, because none of the dialogue and relationships in this show really mean anything anymore and will just change on a whim to brute force every plot beat.
No. This is your obsession. Everything you've done to these people, you did alone.
Let us instead do this once again as partners.
My partner died in this room.
Episode 7 occasionally cuts away from Ekko and Heimerdinger to show the alternate reality Jayce was taken to. Unlike a utopian Zorn, and unlike how they override the minds of their alternate selves, Jayce is brought with his body to the wasteland of a Hexpocalypse. He drags around his uselessly unpowered hammer until falling down a ravine, inexplicably surviving the fall and remaining stuck down there long enough to, as the show would like us to believe, go crazy enough to suffer hallucinations that are fixed shortly after returning to his own reality once he's vaporized Viktor, making as much sense as how Jinx is fixed by Isha, unfixed when Isha gets imprisoned, and then permanently fixed after Isha dies. To escape the ravine, he dismantles his hammer to make a brace for his broken leg and climbs out. He climbs further to the absolute top of the Piltover Hexgate for some reason, and meets a wizardy figure later confirmed to be Viktor from the future, who sends him back. This is where you may realise Mel and Jayce go on the same journey of getting teleported somewhere, trapped at the bottom of a hole until the magic person who put them there lets them leave, and they return to Piltover at the same time to fight together. Different levels of traumatic, but similarly fruitless and shallow in the time they waste trying to be dramatic and mysterious. Future Viktor watched Jayce go through this painful ordeal to, what exactly? Give him first-hand experience of how irreparably Hextech destroys Piltover? A bit of Christmas Carol guiding might have been more comfortable, if walking amongst the rubble was necessary to change his mind. But with how easily Jayce has been shown to change his mind on Hextech before, I don't believe that to be the case.
Send me back.
So Jayce goes back, having experienced some apocalypse stuff future Viktor could have just explained or transferred his memories of, and decides that instead of explaining things to cultist Viktor or letting cultist Viktor receive his memories, he'll just kill him, resulting in cultist Viktor becoming robot Viktor and waging actual brief war on Piltover that gets a bunch of people killed. The war stops and Piltover wins only because Viktor finally reads Jayce's mind and they have a little chat and hug before disappearing into the Arcane together. Then, sometime after disappearing into the Arcane, a Viktor from a timeline that might be this one goes on this multiversal campaign to orchestrate Hextech being introduced to the world.
I thought I could bring an end to the world's suffering.
Desperate to have this big emotional plot twist that recontextualizes the whole series, but ruined by the patronizing extent of its predictability, Viktor was the wizard who saved Jayce and his mother in the snowstorm and gave him the original Hex Crystal. He did this in a bunch of timelines to get different results, perhaps infinitely, if you really want to ruin any semblance of stakes in this story. Besides the nonsensicality of Viktor handing Jayce something that only exists because he goes on to invent it, we must contend with the idiocy of Viktor enabling the apocalyptic technology he wishes to prevent because he deems near apocalypse necessary to avoid full apocalypse. It would make more sense if separate good and evil versions of Viktor were travelling around influencing the timelines to suit their desires, but that would still be unacceptably ridiculous compared to where the story started in Season 1, or even where the story started in Season 2, where the wizard in the Blizzard could have just been a famous character of Runeterra that doesn't need to show up again in Arcane, and League fans can just speculate on the identity of. Now, with this multiversal travelling nonsense, the writers understandably avoid properly explaining the mechanics of every event in the story holds the potential of meaninglessness to nag at the back of our minds. Fortunately, the predictability of the reveal does prepare you for this ridiculousness. As early as Season 1, I already dreaded my suspicions. Episode 2's title, Some Mysteries Are Better Left Unsolved, summing up my feelings nicely. Without League lore knowledge of who the hooded wizard might be, I resorted to expecting someone already in the series to be revealed as him, and who is more likely than one half of the brains behind Hextech trying to cure himself of an illness for which he walks with a cane. The further his transformation progressed in Season 2, including that cane becoming more staff length, the more certain I became Viktor would time travel back to save Jayce in the snowstorm and send him down the path of Hextech. I just didn't quite anticipate how stupid, cheesy and annoying the presentation of his multiversal travel as a mystery would be, nor how easily Robot Viktor would be convinced to change his mind after recently leaping from just wanting to help those in need to eradicating the possibility anyone would be in need again just because he sees Ekko's time travel device and Jayce's memories. If Jayce died in the snowstorm, if future Viktor didn't give him the crystal, or if Hextech was never invented by Viktor or anyone else, reality would be as pleasant and safe from apocalypse as in Ekko and Heimerdinger's Zorn Utopia. But Viktor just had to set these events in motion, had to kickstart the evil Hextech technology, and then prevent it destroying the world by sending Jayce to an alternate reality to meet some version of Viktor who will send him back to not kill another version of Viktor so they can fight and make up and disappear together, because Jayce is such a great guy that without his involvement, Viktor will do it all on his own with nobody to stop him, except in the Zorn Utopia reality where he doesn't. To simplify this for the sake of my sanity, it seems more like the real problem is just Viktor, without whom Hextech will never be taken so far, its benefits need to be eradicated, and since Viktor essentially dies in this dimension at the end anyway, taking Jayce with him, why not eliminate himself to begin with?
You've always wanted to cure what you thought were weaknesses. Your leg. Your disease. But you were never broken, Viktor. There is beauty in imperfections. They made you who you are.
Telling the terminally ill man he shouldn't homogenize humanity with his hive mind because human imperfection is what makes life worth existing just seems a bit insensitive. Especially when, for growing up somewhere oppressed enough it gave him a crippling terminal illness, the narrative rewards him with becoming the big villain of the series. After his abrupt change of heart towards humanity, Viktor was effectively going to kill everyone, so of course they had to band together to stop him. It couldn't get any more one-dimensional.
There must be some part of you still in there.
I am more than I ever was.
Like Ekko and Vi, to name just two others, Jayce and Viktor didn't have a whole lot of value going on in Season 2. What little interaction characters had with those deemed unessential to their plot responsibilities, brief and shallow. And so, Arcane's thematic core has been thoroughly betrayed by the crumbling pillars of every character around it. Whether because they were forgotten or their progression rushed and contradictory, they were demolished to make way for the flimsy scaffolding of a generic Avengers Save the World plot that was hastily traced the night before and slapped with a thin coat of philosophical melodrama confused by the multiverse nonsense fueling it.
I think the biggest change from the way that we were looking at it before was it was very plot heavy, right? It's very focused on kind of like, what's the problem that has to get solved? Who's gonna fight who? What I think most improved after kind of working with these writers was sort of like the emotional story for the characters.
The other blessing and a curse for me and Alex is like we're never satisfied and we always want it to be better. So no matter how much you think you might know about what's coming in Season 2, there's always going to be tons of new stuff to discover. I think people are going to be really excited about what they find.
Arcane Season 1 and 2 aren't on the same page about what their story is about, or at least failed to deliver on what many viewers felt was promised, because it all happened too quickly for an organic evolution to take place that would be accepted. The dozens of nitpicks strewn across its body are negligibly unsightly compared to the few gaping wounds from which its blood and guts are bursting through colourful bandages of pretty animation. But whilst I'm here, I may as well name a few of those nitpicks. Consider this, the show already died, but if it hadn't, it would have died a death by 1,000 nitpicks. Instead of reusing the Imagine Dragons song with a new bland intro sequence that pretentiously references several famous tragedies, integrate one of each episode's expositional music montages into a unique intro for their episode, saving runtime and lessening the frequency of so many music sequences by one instance per episode. The constant, contrived nonsense occurring throughout the memorial attack, starting with the cliche of a main character but nobody else noticing a suspicious guard behind the scenes, then a cloaked spectator trying to assassinate Jayce with the loudest, clunkiest weapon possible that she somehow snuck in. Shimmer zombies skydive in from an airship that arrives out of nowhere and don't instantly obliterate every important character like the original Shimmer zombie was capable of in episode 3 of season 1. Even with their new armor and knife hands. Vi, for instance, barely escapes without the help of her hex gauntlets, but she does still escape. Their armor and helmets are resistant to bullets, but easily shattered by the long-distance throws of spears from Ambessa's soldiers. Arbitrary power levels defined by the immediate needs of the plot that extend to an unexplained giant monster. How did he get so big? Or is he just a race we haven't seen before that only shows up in big action sequences? Chainsaw Lady isn't immediately shot, but still fails to kill or even really harm Jayce, despite his own incompetence to run away and suffering what should be a debilitating back wound. He's so useless without his hammer, we question why he was so effective with it before. Fortunately, Vi has the brilliant idea and timing of running up a building she shouldn't know the layout of, bumping into a patrolling guard with the keys to allow her to retrieve Jayce's hammer, and running with it all the way back to save Jayce from the Chainsaw Lady and blast a laser at the giant monster before it kills everyone. The memorial fight remained without backup until Vi's return, leading you to believe all of Piltover's enforcers have been wiped out or didn't know the fight was occurring. Vi even advises Caitlyn against infiltrating Zorn because Piltover evidently isn't strong enough to win, contrary to how in Season 1, Jayce refused to use Hextech against Zorn because they wouldn't stand a chance and he didn't want to cause any more collateral damage. Jayce, Heimerdinger and Ekko sit around drinking tea, talking about science for what seems like the entirety of Caitlyn's Zorn infiltration, so their venture down into the failsafe can interfere with their fight. Jinx making her entrance in a reflection makes no sense based on where she's standing, and that metal dish she was being reflected off, Caitlyn shoots straight through, and Vi later uses to shield herself from Jinx's machine gun. Act 1 then ends with too many disconnected, mysterious things happening to different characters at once. The nerd bros are teleported, Mel is teleported, and Singed is working in his lab, on top of Vi and Caitlyn separating, Ambessa electing Caitlyn, and Viktor doing whatever the hell he's doing. Neither Ekko or Viktor through the work they've done with their sanctuaries, become revolutionary figures celebrated by the people of Zorn like Jinx, when her actions of firing a rocket at the Piltover Council and somehow pulling off a colourful gas attack on Piltover citizens cause Zorn more grief than glory, and she never shows up to lead anyone in person. Sevika weirdly has zero effect on the crowd, even though they should know she's the closest person to Jinx and should definitely know she was the closest person to Silco. But with her new emo haircut that doesn't at all suit her militaristic mercenary vibe, I kind of understand where they're coming from. It's bizarre she's even still walking free as Silco's ex-right-hand man, and speaking of hands, she only has one with fingers, because she's kept the impractically gimmicky slot machine arm Jinx made for her. Organising such a public gathering around Vander's statue, the most prominent of Zorn's revolutionary symbols, is in the first place a dumb idea that's just asking to get all of your followers swept up by Ambessa and the Enforcers. Rictus has to torture someone to learn this supposedly insider information, and nobody around the perimeter of the gathering sounds any alarms of the impending roundup. Nonetheless, Sevika, the most high-value target, still manages to get away after being impaled in her robotic arm and leaving a trail of liquid all the way to Jinx's hideout. Jinx and Sevika's cliché choice of prison breakout, one disguise, one fake prisoner. Jinx gets an Enforcer uniform from a guard she attempts to be comedic in front of, who doesn't recognise this is the real Jinx. Really don't see what the writers saw in replicating Marvel humour. Walking into the prison, even Ambessa initially overlooks the blue-haired Jinx somehow stuffed inside her helmet, peeking out from under it, thinking back on that odd little detail whilst waiting for the tram from which Vander emerges and doesn't instantly kill her. Also, nobody makes anything of Jinx's what should be recognisable prosthetic middle finger, which Caitlyn knows about and should have informed everybody of because she was the one who shot it off. Inside the prison, the security controlling the cell doors consists of levers easily accessible to anyone walking past. The cringe of everyone looking thankful, silently patting Jinx on the shoulder as they walk past, supposedly making it out of the prison and across the tram line, past the rampaging Vander, Enforcers and Ambessa. Isha and Singed were imprisoned separate from the rest, and Isha is unable to open her door through malfunction or lack of strength, forcing Jinx to go looking for her and enabling the Vander encounter. Vander hesitates killing Jinx long enough to recognise her as Powder and calm down from his bloodlust, much like how his murderous charge suddenly halts and forms a cozy hug around Vi during the tunnel encounter an episode later, and Singed was thoughtful enough to install him with red and green colours as indications of when he's in murder mode or puppy mode. Entering Viktor's sanctuary, Vi is angry at the now-cured Shimmer addict who looked to have betrayed her and Caitlyn's location to Silco in Season 1. But if either of them are the traitor, it's the one who took part in an Enforcer gas attack and has now teamed up with Jinx. And that guy even helped Caitlyn find and purchase a medicine to heal Vi after getting injured from her fight with Sevika. More should be made of the fact this guy has gone from being consumed by Shimmer to something else possibly sinister, but generally, Season 2 scarcely continues the widespread impact Shimmer has had on Zorn, not just the addiction of its citizens, but the economic consequences of Silco leaving behind a dysfunctional empire. All of that was, of course, vaguely portrayed in a music montage and forgotten about. Anyway, Vi doesn't just surrender her gauntlets, but leaves them on the ground in the sanctuary's entrance, an effectively one-of-a-kind piece of technology she relies on to fight, and was unwilling to part with when Jayce requested she do so in Season 1. Jinx takes her hex crystals with her. Isha, inspired by seeing this, takes the crystals from Vi's gauntlets so she can blow herself up later, and Vander, a death monster startled by everything like a scared cat that will go into violent rampage mode with the slightest whiff of blood, gets let in no problem. Singed understands everything he needs to know about Hextech and by extension Viktor's condition and goals from some quick observations of research scribbles in Season 1 and now talking briefly in Season 2, wanting to work with him to preserve Vander or combine their science in some manner he's convinced will save his daughter. When Singed leaves and heads back to the Noxian camp, Vi casually follows him for some reason, perhaps seeking information or confronting him about Vander, but they have never interacted acted before, we don't even know how Vi would recognize Singed, and her following him is essential for getting jumped by a lookout that happens to be the current leader of Piltover, Caitlyn, giving them an isolated reunion that complicates the plan to sneak out Vander that takes up the rest of the episode and determines the rest of the show's plot. Vi and Caitlyn's plan is to repeat the fake prisoner bit Jinx and Sevika already shouldn't have succeeded with. Vi isn't searched when brought into Ambessa's tent, nor is she swiftly incapacitated or executed, even though Ambessa knows Vi and Caitlyn were previously close and Vi could easily disturb her manipulations. In fact, in her monologue, Ambessa literally addresses this as the reason she'll have to eliminate Vi. Vi says something rebellious, punches Caitlyn's electrocuting net grenade, and leaves the tent without any of Ambessa's guards overhearing and stopping her. Vi doesn't kill Ambessa while she's unconscious, as the series wants to maintain Vi as innocent of explicitly killing anyone on screen. Simultaneously, Caitlyn oversees Singed going to give Vander a remedy, and Jinx sits on faraway standby in case anyone tries to do anything to Vander, or to now oversee whether Caitlyn betrays them. Caitlyn is unnecessary anyway. Why does she need to stop Singed when Jinx can just do that? And her involvement Jinx wasn't informed on just risks Jinx freaking out and messing up the breakout. Against all prior expectations, Jinx instead saves Caitlyn from Rictus showing up to stop her. No characters dig into the clearly traumatized transformation Jayce has gone through. They just go along with his plan to stall Viktor, apparently evil now, until he can disable the failsafe or whatever. Based on such limited reasoning, even small groups of Zorn citizens enter Piltover for some brief training and gear upgrades and join the battle. One of these citizens includes a recurring background character who showed up in the episode 7 alternate reality and decided to help after seeing an enforcer expressing kindness. Ambessa allows Mel to leave the Noxus base after she came to have a chat and saw the ominous stuff they were doing with Viktor. Of course, she takes the info back to Piltover with her, and together the team decides Ambessa plans to drag a massive cocoon containing Viktor to the failsafe, until, after blasting it open, it turns out to have been a distraction. Was Ambessa expecting Mel and everyone else to be stupid enough to buy into false information, the plan all along? You decide. This shallow spectacle of a battle, brief as it is, contains too many annoyances to bother listing. To name just two, Mel shows up late to make a dramatic entrance instead of helping protect people from the beginning, and Ambessa's army of spears and shields are too successful against Piltover's guns and hex tech compared to how they're beaten down by the late arrivals from Zorn, supposedly rallied by Jinx and Ekko off screen. You know how all series we've heard hex tech is dangerously overpowered and Ambessa is motivated by getting her hands on some? Yeah, basically, that's just thrown out of the window. Viktor and his robots start converting everyone in their grasp into their hive mind. Why did the robots take so long to join the battle when they can clearly take out or convert everyone with ease, main characters included, but delaying the conversion long enough on the characters needed to save the day? Vander, for instance, hesitates to obliterate or subdue Vi and Jinx despite now being an emotionless, unstoppable killing machine, and the mind control tendrils ignore Ekko whilst he's unconscious, so a bit later he can fly in to throw his time travel device at Viktor. Having their much needed, long overdue talk in the Arcane dimension, Viktor admires Jayce's refusal to give up on him, but I would kind of count walking into his sanctuary and blasting him with a hammer laser to be giving up on him. All of the robots shut down along with their conjoined and ambiguous disappearance into the Arcane, except for Vander, who has enough battery juice left over to facilitate Jinx's fake sacrifice. And finally, after the world-ending Viktor uprising has been thwarted, Caitlyn narrates a return to the familiar cycle of violence themes Season 2 hasn't earned being associated with. Besides that, just what's the point of ending the series by feeding viewers an empty spoon of, yeah, we stopped violence for now, but someday it will happen again, as if saying it outright doesn't ruin what little profundity it derives from countless other better sources.
The fact that we can spend 5 hours in just Piltover and Zon, and then do it again in a second season before we start to zoom out of this one little corner of the world and this handful of characters. Just the possibility space is so wild. You know, Alex made a comment to me last night. He's like, I could see myself telling stories in this universe for the next 30 years.
It's a small miracle that this TV show got made, and it's a smaller miracle that so many god tier artists came together to work on one project, and you can't not be proud of what they did. So yeah,
it's pretty scary to know that you're working on something that really cannot fail. You know, like that's not an option, and so it just makes you question everything.
In the end, limited to just one more season to wrap up this particular story, Season 2 fumbled every step of trying to prioritise the wrong plot threads. They got carried away with upping the animated and musical spectacle of Season 1, but the storytelling depth wasn't deliberately sacrificed for that false benefit. And actually, I think it's indicative of the animation studio breaking their back trying to carry the show to the finish line. They could have justified stylistically indulging to their heart's content, as long as the writers made one of two choices: let the story breathe with another season, or limit its scope to comfortably fit into one. Or maybe that's showing too much optimism for where they take this universe in the future. There's a compelling argument to be made that those future productions hold the responsibility of proving true or false, that Arcane Season 1 was a fluke. They'll struggle aligning the stars to repeat again. We can only guess what went on behind the scenes, using the little footage their documentary series provides, but they did try and fail to stuff what seems to be all of their remaining planned story into a single season without already having figured out the narrative subtleties to hold it together. And they did try to do so without the writing team, who not only made Season 1 as good as it was, but were brought in to fix the direction it was heading in before the production would be allowed to continue past the pilot episode. As though I can't help but speculate, the remaining showrunners and writers were concerned more with getting Arcane over and done with within an officially greenlit 2 seasons, and then moving somewhere else across Runeterra, than they were with the danger of diving into the deep end without their floatables, whilst the lifeguards were distracted looking for other jobs. Whether because the writing talent was no longer there, or they struggled to fit their plans into so short a time, the thematic contradictions, out-of-character behaviour, and uninspired, Marvel-esque, multiversal time travel end-of-the-world spectacle were really not it, even if they are how I initially expected a League of Legends adaptation to go when I first heard about the series. Season 2 squandered how well Season 1 raised my expectations, making the final results all the more disappointing. Will anything change? Hopefully. But Season 2 was still extremely successful commercially and critically. Where and around who in the League universe will they focus on next? And how many music videos will they squeeze in? It could be a long, long wait to find out.
What could have been?